I've been working at this local bar for about 3 years now. Started as just a part-time gig while I was finishing my degree, but the flexible hours and decent tips made it worth staying on full-time after graduation. The job itself isn't too bad. Pour drinks, chat with regulars, clean up. My boss is a decent guy who treats his staff well, and I've sort of become his unofficial assistant over time, helping with scheduling and inventory when needed. About a month ago, we had a serious incident. Three staff members were working the closing shift and somehow failed to check the bathrooms properly before locking up. A customer had passed out in one of the stalls and ended up being locked in the bar overnight. The poor guy woke up around 3 a.m. panicked and called the police. Needless to say, my boss was furious. The three staff members were called into a meeting and given their final warnings. During this meeting, they suggested that someone should be appointed as an official manager to make sure closing procedures were followed correctly. What they really wanted was someone to blame if things went wrong again. One of my co-workers, I won't use her name, but let's just say she's had it out for me since I started, immediately suggested me for the position. She pointed at me and told everyone that I was already the boss's right-hand person anyway, so it made sense for me to take on the role. I simply shrugged and told everyone I didn't mind taking the position. It made sense. I was already handling extra responsibilities, and the small pay bump would be nice. My boss seemed relieved that I accepted and made it official that day. Everything went smoothly for the first week. Then I noticed something odd while counting the till one night. We were short by about 9 pounds. I mentioned it to my boss. My boss told me not to worry too much about the shortage. He explained that it was an old till that sometimes added on products randomly and threw the count off. I nodded and let it go. But 2 nights later, when I was on shift again, the till was down by 15 pounds, exactly. And the next time I worked, it was short 21 pounds. My boss reassured me that it was still within acceptable loss. He reminded me that these old systems weren't perfect. I was starting to get concerned, but before I could investigate further, I overheard my co-worker whispering to my boss. She was suggesting that I might be taking money from the till, pointing out that the shortages only happened on my shifts. She was trying to set me up. My boss looked uncomfortable but explained that he had to take the accusation seriously. I was put under investigation, which meant reduced shifts while they monitored the situation. Interestingly, while I wasn't working, the till was only short by 2-3 pounds per night, which my boss considered normal. This made me look even more suspicious. I decided to take matters into my own hands. As a manager, I had access to the security system remotely. So one night at home, I started going through the closed-circuit television footage from my shifts. What I discovered was shocking. It wasn't me taking money. It was her. The camera angle only showed the right side of the till, and she was clever about it. She would take cash and shove it under the left side of the till, out of camera view. I'm guessing she kept it there so she could put it back if questioned. I kept watching more footage and caught her giving away free drinks to friends. Then I noticed something else strange. We'd been having issues with corrupted CCTV files lately. Sometimes we couldn't access them at all. After digging deeper, I figured out why. This coworker had somehow gotten the password to our CCTV system and downloaded the app on her phone. When she saw someone accessing the footage, she would open the app herself, which locked everyone else out due to our system limitations. The most disturbing discovery came next. Remember that customer who got locked in overnight? It turns out my co-worker had deliberately not set the alarm that night and had been watching this person on the CCTV app after hours. This wasn't an accident. It was planned. My boss and I put the pieces together. We think she was working with the customer in a plot to rob the bar. They probably didn't count on the police being called, or on the CCTV company checking the access logs during their maintenance visit. I brought all this evidence to my boss. He was stunned. I told my boss that I had documented everything: the money under the till, the free drinks, the CCTV tampering, and her watching that person who stayed overnight. My boss acknowledged that the evidence was clear. He thanked me for finding everything. The next day, she was called into the office. I wasn't in the room, but I heard the shouting from outside. My co-worker was yelling that we couldn't prove anything and that this whole situation was ridiculous. My boss told her that we had everything on camera and that the police had been notified. She stormed out, grabbing her belongings and screaming about how we'd regret this. 2 days later, my boss told me that she was not only fired but also facing potential criminal charges for theft and conspiracy. My boss told me that the bar owner was pursuing legal action against her. He also mentioned that he had given me a proper raise, a real manager's salary. I thanked him and said I was just glad we caught her before anything worse happened. The till hasn't been short since she left. Funny how that works. I had been counting down the days until my wife's due date. We had the hospital bag packed for weeks, the nursery set up, and I must have checked the route to the hospital 100 times. When my wife finally shook me awake at 4 a.m. saying her contractions had started, I nearly fell out of bed in my rush to get moving. I excitedly stated that it was happening while trying to maintain my composure despite my racing heart. I asked her how far apart her contractions were. My wife winced as another one hit. She told me they were about 7 minutes apart now, but getting stronger. I jumped into action, grabbing our hospital bag and helping my wife to the front door. My father and brother were staying with us for the birth, and I called out to them that we were heading to the hospital. They quickly got up to help. Just as I was getting my wife settled in the passenger seat, I noticed a figure standing in our driveway, arms crossed. It was my next-door neighbor, blocking my car from backing out. The streetlight illuminated her scowling face. I called out to her, trying to keep my voice steady. I explained that we needed to go to the hospital right away because my wife was in labor. My neighbor didn't budge. She said she needed to talk to me about the trees on our property line, complaining that they were dropping leaves in her yard. I told her that my wife was having a baby and emphasized that we needed to leave immediately. She insisted this would only take a minute. She complained that the trees were a nuisance and mentioned she'd been trying to talk to me about them for weeks. My wife let out a pained groan from the car, and I felt panic rising in my chest. I pleaded with her to move her car, noticing she had parked her vehicle to block our driveway. I stressed that this situation really couldn't wait. My neighbor refused to move. She complained that she was tired of cleaning up our leaves every single day and demanded that the trees be removed. I was getting desperate now. I promised we could discuss this when we got back, but explained that my wife needed medical attention. My neighbor still refused to move until we resolved the issue, insisting it was important to her. By this point, my father and brother had come outside to see what the holdup was. My brother asked what was going on and why we weren't leaving yet. I explained the situation quickly, my voice shaking with frustration. My father approached my neighbor and he addressed her as ma'am and pointed out that there was a woman in labor. He suggested that whatever issue she had with the trees could be addressed later. My neighbor complained that she'd been trying to address it later for weeks and that no one took her seriously. My wife called out from the car window, clearly in pain. She begged for us to go to the hospital. My neighbor didn't even look at her. She just stood there with her keys dangling from her finger, a stubborn expression on her face. My brother surveyed the situation and noticed my neighbor had left her car running. Without hesitation, he walked over to her car, got in and moved it to the side of the road. My neighbor shouted in protest, asking what he thought he was doing and asserting that it was her car. She rushed toward her vehicle, momentarily forgetting about blocking our path. I seized the opportunity and quickly backed out of the driveway. My neighbor yelled after us not to leave and threatened to call the police. I didn't have time to worry about her threats. My wife's contractions were coming faster now, and we needed to get to the hospital. My father jumped in the back seat to help with my wife, while my brother stayed behind to deal with the neighbor. We made it to the hospital just in time. 3 hours later, our son was born. 7 pounds, 8 ounces of perfect baby boy. It was the happiest moment of my life, though slightly tainted by the stress of our departure. While we were at the hospital, my brother called to tell me that my neighbor had indeed called the police, claiming he had tried to steal her car. Thankfully, we had installed security cameras around our property the previous year after some neighborhood break-ins. My brother was able to show the officers the footage of what really happened. My neighbor deliberately blocking our exit while my visibly pregnant wife was in distress. The police were not amused by my neighbor's actions. Instead of my brother getting in trouble, she ended up being charged with reckless endangerment of a pregnant woman. The officers told her that her behavior could have resulted in serious harm if there had been complications with the birth. When we brought our son home 3 days later, we noticed a for sale sign in my neighbor's yard. Apparently, the police visit and the realization that everyone in the neighborhood now knew what she had done was enough to make her decide to move. As for the trees she was so upset about, they're still standing more beautiful than ever. I've been working at this marina on a First Nations reserve for almost a year now, and I couldn't ask for a better job. The management treats us incredibly well, the views are stunning, and most of the customers are pleasant. The marina is part of a small plaza that includes a restaurant, tobacco shop, and a recently opened cannabis store. We do full-service gas pumping for both boats and cars. I'm not First Nations myself, I'm actually very Caucasian, but I've always felt welcome and respected here. I grew up in a small town about 20 miles from the reserve. After dropping out of college, turns out engineering wasn't for me, I struggled to find decent work. When a friend mentioned the marina was hiring, I jumped at the opportunity. Despite my initial nervousness about being an outsider, the community has been nothing but kind to me. Our marina has some strict rules, especially since the pandemic hit. The reserve is only open to residents and property owners, which some tourists don't seem to understand. That's why on busy weekends, like Canadian Thanksgiving, we have a First Nations police officer stationed at the plaza to keep things orderly. This past Saturday was absolutely packed. My co-worker and I were running back and forth between the lakeside and roadside pumps, barely keeping up with the demand. The officer on duty that day is someone I respect immensely. Even though I've had negative experiences with police in the past, this guy is genuinely one of the good ones. Fair, respectful, and just doing his job. During our busiest rush, a woman pulled up to my pump. Instead of telling me she needed gas, she just got out of her car and started walking away. There was already a line forming behind her. I politely asked her if she was getting gas. She rudely responded that she wasn't, her tone making it clear she had no interest in further conversation. I explained that she would need to move her car since other people were waiting, but she completely ignored me and continued walking toward the other side of the plaza. The officer noticed what was happening and intercepted her. I couldn't hear their entire conversation, but I caught her defensively claiming she knew her rights and didn't understand why she was being approached. The officer told her that she was banned from the premises. They moved back toward her car while I tried to calm down the increasingly frustrated customers in line. The officer reminded her that she was banned from the premises for 30 days, and that since this happened 9 days ago, she still had 3 weeks until she would be allowed on First Nations land. She protested, claiming she wasn't actually on plaza property yet, just at the gas station, and questioned his authority to speak to her that way. The officer patiently explained that the entire area from one specific tree to another was First Nations land, and therefore plaza property, and repeated his request for her to leave. What she said next made my blood boil. She made a racist remark about a First Nations officer not having the authority to arrest a white woman. Then she looked at me expectantly, seeking validation for her racism. When I said nothing, she called me a traitor and continued complaining about how she had been treated back there. The officer repeated his instruction that she had been banned from the entire plaza for 30 days and needed to leave immediately. She argued that he wasn't a real cop and had no authority over her, using another racial slur in the process. The officer assured her that he was indeed a member of the reserve's police department with full authority to arrest her like any other police officer. She threatened to sue the plaza and get everyone fired, gesturing at me too, even though I was back inside helping another customer pay for boat gas and snacks. The officer told her that if she didn't leave, he would have to arrest her, and if she returned within the next 3 weeks, she would also be arrested. Realizing he'd called her bluff, she huffed, got back in her car, and mumbled another racial slur before driving off. The next day was extremely slow. I'd been watching Netflix almost my entire shift. Then I saw my coworker walking over from the parking lot to start his shift. Behind him was the same woman, now being pushed against a car and handcuffed by our officer. I couldn't hear everything, but the woman was loudly protesting about being arrested by a First Nations officer, threatening to get him fired and sue everyone involved. The officer led her to the other side of the parking lot. Though I couldn't see them anymore, I could still hear her yelling obscenities. Later, the officer filled me in on what happened. Apparently, she'd come back wanting to videotape the cannabis shop to document what she claimed were health hazards, bad products, and safety issues. This was ridiculous considering the cannabis store had only been open for less than a year, and the licensing process is incredibly strict. Everything in there was brand new and up to code. When the officer tried to arrest her, she actually called 911. She called the police on the police. Her justification was that he wasn't a real cop because he was First Nations. So while our officer had to explain the situation to the other police department, she continued screaming in the background. The other police department confirmed our officer's authority, of course. They released her eventually, but extended her ban from the reserve indefinitely. My co-worker and I couldn't stop laughing about it. The entitlement of some people is truly astounding. The officer handled it perfectly though, professional throughout the entire ordeal despite her racist remarks. I later found out this wasn't her first offense. According to my boss, she had been coming to the cannabis shop almost every other day, constantly complaining about bad products and causing scenes. Her 30-day ban had been the result of a nasty incident. Now she's banned for good, and the plaza is much more peaceful without her racist tirades. I've been a nurse for 8 years, working mostly in orthopedics. I pride myself on making patients comfortable during their vulnerable moments. But there was one time I broke my own kindness rule. I don't regret it. 2 years ago, I was working with a patient who'd had hip replacement surgery 5 days earlier. He wasn't outright rude at first, just entitled. The type who treats hospital staff like servants. That morning during medication rounds, I found him in the hallway scrolling through his phone. I approached with his acetaminophen, regular pain meds that taste terribly bitter if not swallowed quickly. I greeted him politely and told him it was medication time. He barely acknowledged me with a muttered whatever. When I handed him the pills, he unwrapped them and threw the wrapper straight onto the floor, despite a trash can being just 2 feet away. I pointed out that he'd thrown garbage on the floor. His dismissive "so what" response made my blood simmer. When I suggested he could have given me the wrapper to dispose of, he told me not to worry because the maid would pick it up. He put the pills in his mouth and wheeled toward his room for water. I picked up his trash, counting to 10 to calm myself down. Following him to his room, I watched as his wheelchair bumped his bedside table. The table wobbled, causing his large water bottle to fall to the opposite side, completely out of his reach. With his hip replacement, he couldn't maneuver to get it. He was now stuck with dissolving bitter pills and no water. He tried explaining his predicament, but I cut him off, saying not to worry because the maid would pick it up. I then turned to check on another patient, deliberately taking my time while watching him struggle with the increasingly bitter paste in his mouth. He called out again, but I claimed I needed to check on other patients first. I moved methodically through the room, checking on all other patients while ignoring his growing distress. Finally, as I prepared to leave, he desperately explained that he needed his water for the pills. I feigned surprise, apologizing and claiming I thought he just wanted something thrown away. I retrieved his bottle, adding pointedly that helping patients was my job, not the maid's. The look on his face was insane as he gulped water to wash away the horrible taste. For the rest of his stay, he was noticeably polite to all staff. He always used the trash can and even thanked the environmental services worker who cleaned his room. Sometimes a little taste of your own medicine, bitter as it may be, is exactly what's needed.